I've lived in 5 provinces in a territory. I consider myself a Canadian through and through. I've had experience from the East Coast to the West Coast and up north. This country, every single place has its beauty. Every single place has its opportunity. And when I was in Saskatchewan, to think that I would have ever paid double what I paid for a strip mall for a 700 square foot condo in Vancouver, like that is a world apart.
Welcome to the Tom Storey Show with Steve Karrasch and Tom Storey, where we discuss everything real estate or whatever else is on our minds.
All right, welcome back to this week's episode of the Tom Storey Show. This week's guest is someone I'm very excited to have on the show. Trevor Koot has joined us. He is the CEO of the BCREA. Now, Trevor, we have lots of realtors that listen to us, but also just a lot of homeowners or renters or people looking to get into the market. What is the BCREA for people that don't know that acronym?
And our world is really good at acronyms, isn't it?
Yeah,
like, and I'm not just talking the real estate world, like the world in general. So the BC Real Estate Association, BCREA, as you introduced it, is the BC Real Estate Association. We're an association representing the 8 real estate boards in the province of British Columbia. And through the boards, over 26,000 realtors. Our tagline is, we are the voice of 26,000 realtors in the province of British Columbia. So we provide services like education. We have a very developed, unlike other provinces, a very developed professional development program for realtors where they're required to take so much continuing education over the course of their licensing time. And then a big piece of what we do is advocacy. We lobby the government and regulator on behalf of those 26,000 realtors. You've had our chief economist on, Brendan Ogmanson. So we have a big economics component of what we do. And then we do a lot of support. So as we were joking about at the opening of the podcast, we're really going to do a deep dive into the role of the managing broker because we think everybody is super interested in that. But that's an area we're very interested in, and making sure that those that linchpin of a role has all of the support that they need in the changing environment. So that just gives you a little bit of context of what the BC Real Estate Association does.
I know we're joking about that a little bit, but also at the same time, like, maybe a little bit later on when the hardcores are still here. That's actually an extremely important part of the real estate industry is, for instance, managing brokers and their roles, and the fact that they're a dying breed of old-timey guys that still wear button-up shirts to the office, right? So I would love to get into that. But I think the explanation, I just want people to kind of understand a little bit because, again, acronym upon acronym. I don't even think Tom knew when I said, hey, I'm going to have Trevor come on. I don't think Tom really understood where your role is. We've also had in the past Hudak on for the longest time, who was basically in your role in Ontario, right? So
that's right.
I guess I should call him by his first name too. He's Tim, friend of the show. But this is the way it works. So us as realtors, we are licensed and we work for a brokerage. So we're basically subcontractors. Those brokerages and ourselves are members of boards. And then boards have something above them, the association, which is you. And then we also have a national association, which is CREA. So that's kind of the hierarchy. And then we have the regulators who are not us at all, not part of a membership. And they are the police or the government, we would call it, right?
But their acronym looks just like yours. There's one extra letter. It's very confusing.
So a joke that I tell, and I use this for an entire year because I go around to all the real estate boards, their AGMs, and I give my little update and how are things going, state of the union kind of thing. And one joke that I was using last year that fell flat every single time, and I really love it when I tell a joke and it takes about 10 or 15 seconds for people to get, and I'm already on to the next topic. But I was saying, so our regulator in British Columbia is the BC Financial Services Authority, so the BC FSA. And I was saying that we're at least 40% different than, BCREA is at least 40% different than BC FSA because 2 of the 5 letters in our acronyms are different. See?
And then just silence.
Yeah, and that's and it doesn't get any better than that. Like that is the peak of my humor, and it's awesome.
I'd like to know from your perspective, like what took you to this role of CEO of the BCREA? Like, were you an active realtor before? Did you come from a different industry? What got you to today?
Yeah. What I'm going to do, Tom, I'm going to give you the Coles Notes version because I know that we want to get into the kind of the meat of the conversation, but I think it is like, I appreciate that because I think it is good context to for people to know kind of what my background is and where I'm coming from. So I was first licensed in Saskatchewan in 2005. In 2007, I bought my first brokerage. I waited the mandatory 2-year period from being licensed to being able to get a broker's license and buy a brokerage, which was a Century 21 franchise. I at the same time started what started as a small property management company and grew that to 1,000 doors in 5 cities in Saskatchewan. I had a mortgage brokerage company, Centum Mortgage Managers, and then I moved away from the franchises and focused on property management and started a little boutique commercial brokerage. And at the same time all of that was happening, I was the chair of the Real Estate Commission, so the provincial regulator in Saskatchewan. And through that role, I got involved with an organization called the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials, which is an international real estate regulatory group, so represent an association of real estate regulators from around the world. I got really involved with them from a governance perspective, and certainly my role as chair of the Real Estate Commission for 5 years gave me a taste of kind of that more of that leadership environment and kind of making changes. We rewrote the entire legislation in Saskatchewan. It still hasn't been adopted, but we went through the process of redrafting the entire act during the time that I was there. So seeing the opportunity to kind of lead an industry versus being a salesperson, a realtor, really kind of scratched an itch for me. And so randomly in 2017, my family and I moved from Saskatchewan, my family being my wife and my daughter and I, moved to Kamloops, British Columbia, just on a whim, had no plans. It was time for a change. During all of this time, I had other businesses. I had a property development company. I did a bunch of real estate development, usually retrofits or renovations of existing property, condominium. I did some strata or condominium conversions, so taking apartment buildings, turning them into condos. So those were all still running. I had a gym and supplement store in Saskatchewan, so all of that business was still running. We went to Kamloops, and the role of the CEO of the real estate board was available, just happenstance. It happened to be available when I landed in Kamloops. I applied, got that role a week later. Started that in 2017. In 2019, the CEO role of the Kootenay Real Estate Board, so kind of a different jurisdiction in British Columbia, she was retiring, so I took over that role. So I was dual CEO and 2 boards at the same time. And then we amalgamated those. I was part of the team that amalgamated the organizations into the Association of Interior Realtors in British Columbia. So we took 4 boards and combined them into one. And I put up my hand at that time. That was 2021, 2022. I put up my hand to be the sacrificial lamb. It's very often that these things don't happen because everybody's possessive over their roles, and rightly so. Everybody wants a job. They've worked hard. They're everybody's entitled to kind of move their career forward. But I said, if that's going to be the thing that prevents what I think is best for the industry, then I'll be the one to kind of step aside, which I did. But it was just at the same time that my predecessor at the BC Real Estate Association was retiring, and so I put my name in for this. So it's been a 20-year career, all within real estate, going from realtor, registrant in Saskatchewan. Kind of the way I always say it is wearing all the hats over that 20 years, getting all of those different perspectives, having been a managing broker, having been a regulator, having been an MLS CEO, and now in this role. There's not many rooms that I can walk into that I can't understand the perspective of the people I'm chatting with. That was the Coles Notes version, and it was still too long.
I should just ask you what you haven't done. I
haven't been on this podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Can I just bring up Saskatchewan for a second? I met with a seller the other day in Toronto, and his family was all back in Saskatchewan, and he was telling me what's going on in the market there, and I was looking at him like, what? is this the only market in Canada? Like, if you've been tracking, apparently Saskatchewan is like, things are moving, prices are going up, there's investors flowing in, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, their challenge is actually keeping up right now versus some other markets. So I landed there in 2005. I moved from Edmonton. My daughter was born in Edmonton, and of course, during that time, Ralph Klein era, conservatives in Alberta, everything's clipping along, oil, gas, all of that kind of stuff. Pre-recession, like the recession in the States. And so I moved in 2005, got my license, and everybody in Edmonton was like, "What are you doing? This is crazy." And of course, I was too young to know, like, I'm not following, all this stuff that's happening. I'm just like, okay, the reason was family. Like my wife's family was down there. My daughter was born in Edmonton. But then all of a sudden we go into what everybody else perceived to be a recession. The party changes in Saskatchewan. We've got the Saskatchewan party under Brad Wall. Doors are open for business, and everywhere else was all of a sudden not struggling, but certainly there were markets in 2008, 2009 that were, quieter, and Saskatchewan was just going gangbusters. And I think that's what we're seeing today is kind of that same kind of bucking the trend of what happens elsewhere when you've got great opportunity. I mean, it's a great province for opportunity, always has been, but it just needs to be balanced against the lack of opportunity in other places.
Do you think, and I don't want to say this in like a coming off the wrong way, but you looked at, what happened in markets like Greater Vancouver and Greater Toronto and just the price growth that we've seen. Quebec's kind of its own thing because of the language and things like that. And then you start looking around, and we saw when the pandemic hit, all this migration happened from BC, from Ontario to Alberta. Calgary went through its craziness. Edmonton's still a super hot market. Now Saskatchewan, is it kind of like, and I want to be careful what I say here, but like the last place people would actually want to live that has reasonable housing prices? Is that fair? Like,
no, that's Winnipeg.
Okay.
So just in order for us not to feel like for the listener that we're going down the wrong road here and rating the provinces and the livability
on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rank it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And please say it loudly and clearly into the microphone. I've lived in 5 provinces in a territory, and I will say that I consider myself a Canadian through and through. I've had experience from the East Coast to the West Coast and up north. And this country, every single place has its beauty. Every single place has its opportunity. And I mean, the environments that we experience in each province builds the resiliency of the folks that are there. And I think Saskatchewan is a true testament to that. I think that you're probably not entirely wrong. I mean, we always talk about Vancouver especially, but certainly Toronto in that conversation about the market there and about how, the unaffordability, the challenges that people have to buy a home, the need for intergenerational wealth and transfer of wealth in order to get people into housing, all of those types of stories. But those have been happening for 50 or 60 years, right? Like Vancouver, when you talk Vancouver compared to Regina in 1985, it's the same conversation as 1996, which is the same conversation as 2004, which is et cetera, et cetera. It's just those comparisons when you're taking two completely different markets, completely different economies, completely different types of people, you're going to have a different type of conversation. And so I would say there's probably a little bit of that trend that you're talking about, but I think that is the value of Canada, is that we have that diversity, not just in the people, but in the economies and the opportunities.
I'm wondering now, with all the reports coming out, mostly by the
how is that for a balanced answer?
That was really good. Yeah, that was good. You've done this before.
You didn't corner me on that one. Try again.
I'll try again. Oh, don't worry, I'll get to it. The remote work is a big conversation. There's been tons of reports coming out where the big banks are like, all the CEOs of the big banks are like, we want you back. One of the big things we've seen is that there was a good amount of people from these quote unquote more expensive markets going to Alberta, Saskatchewan, you name it, because they could still do their job remote. Do you think that that's a big factor where if everyone's like, you got to get at least 3 days a week, you're in the office, that no longer becomes a thing? Is there enough local jobs? I didn't think this episode was going to be talking about Saskatchewan the whole time, but can people stay there by what's available locally, or do they have to depend on some of that as well?
So the world has really changed in that respect, and what I can talk to, I can talk to my own personal experience being a CEO of an organization where we've had the conversations, and I've had a lot of conversations with colleagues as in a leadership position. This whole remote work, hybrid environment, back to office has been a narrative since 2020, right? Like it's been kind of an ongoing like debate almost, and not debate with each other, what's right, what's wrong, but an internal debate. What should I do for our organization and for our people? And so I can speak to that, but I think just going back to kind of that 2021 era, kind of when, you know, I don't know when we were coming out of COVID, like 2021, 2022 sure. kind of environment.
Yep.
In 20, I'm going to say 18, 19, we developed a platform at the Kamloops, Kamloops and District Real Estate Association of all places. So in Kamloops, the little board that I was a part of, we called it Buyer Path. And so what we did was had all of the realtors as part of their data entry into the MLS system, put the buyer postal code, not the listing postal code, but where the buyer was coming from. And we started doing that pre-COVID. And so all of a sudden, realtors could, as part of their marketing plan, as part of their listing conversation, show sellers, literally they could search based on an apartment style condo in the $500,000 range in this area of the city. This is where the percentage of buyers are coming from and where we should target our marketing, right? And of course, most of them were local, but it showed if everybody was coming from the Lower Mainland or coming from other jurisdictions. And so mapping that gave a really good visual for people to say, okay, this is where people are coming from. And so what happened was post-COVID, when all of the conversation, all of the media, everything was talking about this migration from urban to rural or to smaller municipalities, we were the only place in North America that could show down to the 10th of a decimal point to exactly the percentage of change of people migrating to rural areas pre-COVID versus post-COVID. And we did see a market rise coming from the Lower Mainland into Kamloops from pre-COVID to post-COVID. I think you're right. I think certainly the federal government mandates changed some of that narrative. It gave a little bit of a trigger for some of the bigger organizations like banks and others to start having that conversation about back to work. And if we venture into a conversation around AI, we can talk about productivity as well. But my metric has and will continue to be productivity. Are we producing what I expect we should produce and what our constituents expect us to produce? And if that metric is good, no matter what our work environment is, I'm all about autonomy. I'm all about giving people agency, letting them kind of manage their own lives in the way that they want to see, being able to do that. All of that said, I think that some of these markets are going to continue to have these internal debates about how much they force people to come back to the office when they can have really good quality people that aren't living in their jurisdiction. And that is going to continue to be that conflict. If somebody moved to Regina because of the opportunity around housing and a spouse got a position there, whatever, but they are the exact right person for a company in Toronto, I think the bigger organizations that like to leverage power, that want a little bit more control over the people and what everybody's doing, are going to continue to force back to work. I think innovative, creative, forward-thinking smaller companies are going to look for the talent wherever they might be. And so there's going to continue to be a balance. I think that will continue to allow Saskatchewan and other markets like it. My family is still in New Brunswick. There's a ton of people going to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia because of affordability, but still having that opportunity to work for companies outside of that jurisdiction. So that was a long-winded answer. They're all long-winded. Tom, cut me off if you need to.
No, this is exactly what we want.
Hey, agents, you know that a clean and crisp real estate website is a must for your business. To start your free site right now, go to realtyninja.com/Tom, and you will pay absolutely nothing until your site is ready to launch. And then when you are ready to launch your brand new site, you will save 20% off your entire first year just by going to realtyninja.com/Tom. realtyninja.com/Tom. So what are you waiting for? Get a beautiful real estate website for your business right now at realtyninja.com/Tom.
Our listeners don't want to listen to me and Steve. They want to listen to the guest.
Yeah.
Speaking of AI, I don't know if you could tell, this isn't actually Steve. It's just his AI twin.
Yeah.
And I haven't given him a chance to ask the questions I know that are burning. So
his left ear keeps disappearing. I was wondering
So Steve, if that's really you, I know you got a bunch of questions we got to get through here. You want to get going on them?
Well, I mean, okay, so we've your focus is supporting the industry through the province. So let's kind of focus here on BC a little bit. BC hasn't necessarily had what I would consider a stellar start to the year from a real estate agent's point of view, right? Like sales are down quite a bit. I grabbed the quote from Brendan, friend of the show, coworker of yours, I guess. And his quote just this week was, most markets on the island in BC, Vancouver Island, markets in the interior more or less have gotten back to normal. And it's been a pretty slow start. But Metro Vancouver is the area that is seemingly still suffering. So my question, if that's the case, what do you have? And I'm going to preface this. I know that you're not the economist at the BCREA or any of that, but what do you see coming for the second half of 2025 in BC real estate?
Yeah. I mean, the beauty of, it's challenging at the best of times for economists to make their predictions, right? To do their forecasting, to base everything on what kind of quote unquote normal historically has looked like. I can't even imagine. Well, I can imagine because I see it every day. Brendan is my colleague. He's part of my leadership team. And I see the challenges that they have as economists today with all of the uncertainty, with the uncertainty metrics that are playing into the consumer, right? Like the consumer. It's no longer about interest rates. It's no longer about Bank of Canada, what they're going to do. It's this: how do you measure the impact of uncertainty when you're talking about geopolitical environments? It seemed like, start of the year was crazy. Uncertainty was highest it's been in decades, if not ever. And then all of a sudden we were starting to get into an environment where there were trade talks and negotiations and a little bit calmer. We didn't hear the whole 51st state conversation for, more than 6 days or whatever it was. And all of a sudden it seemed like, okay, maybe we're on to a path here. And that's when we started seeing markets outside of Vancouver start to pick up. May, June has been, better. People are busier and there's a little bit of movement. But then all of a sudden, and to nobody's surprise, and yet out of nowhere, we're back to, crazy tariffs right across the board, 200 letters that go out. And so when I talk to Brendan, the best number an economist can throw out is 40%. There's a 40% chance because it's not quite 50-50. It's not but it still shows a little bit. So I think there's a 40% chance that things are going to continue to pick up for later in this year. Yeah. And I'll just leave it at that because that's an economist's answer.
Hang on though. I want to actually just hitting a slightly different.
That was another one of those bad jokes.
You're now it's 40% every joke you have. I get it.
I didn't even notice that.
You and Brendan both doing bad dad jokes. I get it. We're right there with you. We're right. Both of us are right there with you. So you've now transferred then your business. So you must be in and out of Vancouver daily. Or like, are you working in Vancouver or are you elsewhere? Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm
You've recently then, within the last couple of years, come to Vancouver.
Yep. 2022, right? I landed in Vancouver.
So you've moved the wrong way. Maybe I'd like to ask you just on a personal note, like what has that experience been like coming from doing the reverse of what everybody else has done? Yeah. Was your shock of coming to the Lower Mainland and like just in your day-to-day life, not in your business life, but like seeing the real estate prices and all that sort of stuff, was that overwhelming for you?
Yeah, not for me, only because I was in the world already, right? I was the CEO in Kamloops of the board there, so seeing the MLS system, being part of those conversations, having constant conversations with Brendan while he was in that role and I was in a different role, I knew what the market was like. I'll tell you though, being in Saskatchewan and thinking like I was buying strip malls for half the price of what I bought our condo for in Vancouver, right? Like that is a world apart. And like when I was in Saskatchewan, to think that I would have ever paid double what I paid for a strip mall for a 700 square foot condo would have been absolutely ridiculous to me, especially the investor in me and kind of like all things related to, future and finance and everything else. But when the reality is, this is all coming from a very high level of privilege, and I completely appreciate that. I'm very fortunate to have a good job and I have some element of job security and being able to purchase a condo for us, but we were also in a fortunate place where our daughter had gone off to university. It's just my wife and I. We don't need a whole lot. So we're literally in a 690 square foot condo, a little townhouse in Chinatown, and in our mid 40s, living our best lives in downtown Vancouver. And but all like it works for us because we weren't trying to get in there and get a large single family home with a yard. So I understand that, those are very different conversations.
Yeah. I fantasize about being an empty nester.
So this is a little, we're diverging a little bit, but I tell people, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, obviously, but when I hear people having kids or with young kids, I say, get to empty nester as soon as possible. It's glorious.
Yeah, I bet.
It's so good. Like
Trevor, your buyer profile is like my ideal client right now in the city of Toronto.
Oh yeah.
Is empty nester or been an empty nester for like 10, 15 years. Buying a condo, they're not overly concerned about the next 2 years of market volatility.
Yes.
They want something nice. They have a decent budget. That's like my perfect client in today's market because the younger ones are so scared to enter if prices could continue to go down. And I don't really blame them. But then there's other people that have been around. They've had other properties over the years. And they're just like, it's a lifestyle decision more than anything. Obviously, we don't want it to go down half in price. But yeah, we're ready to go, and their budget's usually pretty healthy. It's been interesting on my side.
But we've really migrated. Like this is. I'm really cognizant of your audience, and I want to make sure that some of this stuff is less about me and more about what they're interested in. So, an interesting conversation that is a tough one to have. I would suggest, as in my role as the representing 26,000 realtors in the province and being a linchpin in kind of the real estate industry. We've really moved away from the idea of a house being a home. Right? Purchasing a property for a roof over your head. And the example that I always use is my dad bought our family home in New Brunswick, 30 acres, 2,500 square, 5 kids. I have 4 sisters. Bought our home for 80 grand or whatever it was in 1984. And he did not go and get the house appraised in 1985 to see if it went up or down in value. Right. At that time, we didn't have, market analysis. You didn't call a realtor and say, what's my house worth today? But he didn't care. He bought a home at 22% interest at 1984. And it was a roof over 5 kids' heads that he could raise them in. It provided shelter and safety. And it was our family home. And that's what he could afford. And we've really moved away from that. People aren't buying houses as homes. They're buying it as what's next year or the year after going to be, not what does 10 years from now look like, right? Or 15 or whatever it is. And I think, and that's not right or wrong. It's not. Like, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's just the environment that we're working within. And as a result, it's really changed that narrative. People are really focused on that short term in values, and it's unfortunate because if we're looking at homes, then it's a different conversation.
I found too, like I have a lot of condo buyer clients that are very educated. They're normally from the finance world. And it's like they're making some pretty valid points to me where I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. Like mathematically over the next 2 years, renting is probably smarter for you. Like I can't argue with that. Like the numbers are the numbers. And for so many years, at least here in Toronto, if you didn't get in the market got away from you because you couldn't save at the same rate it was going up. And then 2021, 2022 happened. Prices came down significantly. We're just so close. We got really close to the sun there and a lot of people got burnt. And now it didn't happen that long ago. We're only 3 years after that. I think people are just so worried like, hey, maybe it's not quite done yet. And I'm just going to wait here from the sidelines, which they couldn't really do previously because they would just watch housing prices accelerate. Now it's like, none of us are economists, but to say that any big meaningful price increases are going to happen in any of our markets over the next few years, I just don't think is realistic. I think it's going to be pretty sideways trading in terms of values. But it's the first time in a long time they might have a pretty good point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a whole bunch of factors there. Like, and I'm always very cognizant that a lot of my comments come from a place of privilege and it's not, there's so many people. My wife works in supportive housing, downtown East Side and Douglas Street in Victoria. So I'm very aware of, the other end of the housing spectrum. There's a lot of people out there that even when we say rent for a little while, that's not an option. But for those that are, and the people that you're talking about, I think there's kind of a couple of components there. One is that there's always been this sentiment in Canada and in other places in the world, for anybody that was kind of coming up in the 90s or early 2000s and started experiencing anything to do with housing since kind of that late 2000s era or early 2010s. There's kind of this idea that values should always go up and interest rates should always stay low. And I mean, you go back any time over 50 years and that's not true. Like there's ebbs and flows, there's markets change and values change. And then the other piece around all of that is kind of the perception, and I hate to use the word stigma, but the perception of renting in North America. And this, like, home ownership is definitely an aspirational thing in North America. And again, rightly or wrongly, that's kind of where we've ended up with this, idea of a house being an investment and those types of sentiments. And so as a result, with that being the aspiration, it almost turns renting into the thing we don't want to do. And I think there's certainly, like, if we're talking about housing as opposed to real estate investing or real estate being a vehicle for future financial security and wealth, which it can be, but it changes the affordability conversation, right? And certainly there's a bigger conversation to be had around that stuff. But it's all of these different components that start to enter the conversation. And there's so many people struggling. I see it every single day. I live in Chinatown. I live right next to the downtown East Side in Vancouver. And there's so much opportunity for us to continue to build housing for the sake of housing and not focus on this future investment scenario.
From your position, is there anything that you can look at and say, okay, I know you're mostly just focused on the realtors and the brokerages, and I get it, but on that side of things, that's a topic that we've been talking about forever. Like, let's build the homes for the people that need them, this affordable housing. And I think the definition of affordable, there's an actual definition of it, but everyone kind of doesn't exactly know what it means to them when they're making that comment.
Yeah.
Is there something that can be done? Can it only be the government that pays for it? Is there any other way that this can happen? I know it's a tough question, but
yeah.
From your vantage point.
Yeah. So there's no easy answer. And I think, like, any time, and I've said this a number of times, that when folks come up to me and you're having a conversation around affordability or around opioid crisis or around mental health or around the healthcare system or the economy or, affordability in general, whatever it is, and somebody says, all they need to do is, no, like that's not the conversation, because one, there is no they. The they is all of us collectively. And there is no all they need to do is. Like there's such a multitude of factors that play into every single, and so much of it is interwoven. I mean, we talk about housing at the opposite end of the housing continuum from where you and I operate on transactional housing. And it's like you're incorporating mental health, you're incorporating you certainly subsidization from government, you're incorporating all of these other aspects into that conversation. What I will say, and this sounds like for a lot of listeners, this is going to sound like a cop-out, or it's going to sound like it's so detached that it can't possibly play a role. But for me, a big part of it is data, is making sure that decisions that are being made, creating a better ecosystem for collecting data so that decisions that are being made are well informed and that we know exactly what the impacts of those decisions are. And I'll speak to this more on and I'm doing a lot of research and kind of working with folks in this area to see where we can start to have more meaningful conversations around data collection on the supportive housing environment and the shelter environment, especially in British Columbia. There's 800 nonprofit housing societies in British Columbia.
Buying a home is a big deal, so don't let your home inspection cause you more stress. For over 45 years, Karrasch Dunlop has helped buyers across Canada understand the homes that they are buying with detailed, calm, clear, client-first inspections. Karrasch Dunlop inspectors don't just point out problems, they explain what really matters in a way that will protect you in your home purchase. If you want confidence in your home inspection, top agents and home buyers trust Karrasch Dunlop. So to check out where they service and to book your inspection, go to karrashandunlop.com right now.
800 nonprofit housing societies in British Columbia, many of them financed by BC Housing, $2.5 billion, $2 billion government-funded organization. All of that, the opportunity for an ecosystem of data to flow between all of those organizations to understand where housing availability is, but also the accessibility for the folks who are looking, and making sure that there's actual movement, the right movement through the housing continuum for those that have the opportunity to do that. Those metrics are not there. There isn't a visible line of sight. And I think that's a bigger conversation. I mean, it's a profound conversation, and one that we're starting to see a more success in that on our end of the housing continuum with MLSs and with data really feeding a lot of those conversations. But I think there's a huge opportunity on the other end.
One of the things that I've seen recently in our market here in Toronto is our current mayor, Olivia Chow, is NDP, right?
Yeah.
Like very vocally NDP, talks about this a lot. And there was something recently where she was standing outside of this new affordable or community housing that they're building. And they were essentially like, they looked like shipping containers. Like that's what they were built with, that same material. And she was posting this video saying, hey, look what we're doing. Now, it wasn't a lot, but man, the comments on that video were like, who the hell would ever live in that piece of crap? And I find like the people that comment on it are never the ones that were going to live in it. They were never the ones that they were built for. And I feel like even when we do something that's somewhat positive, it just gets shat on. And it's like, well, that sucks. It's like, well, are you the one moving into it? Maybe that's just the internet. That's just where we're at right now because everyone has an anonymous username and they can say whatever
people
they
like me commenting all the time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's you, eh? Yeah.
I mean, it's not. What are these initiatives a lot of the time, right? Like, as you say, it's not one thing. Like the housing problem that you probably walk by all the time if you're involved on the downtown east side, Trevor, is not one necessarily always of housing. As you said, there's so many factors, right? There's addiction, there's mental health stuff, there's supports, there's crime, there's the whole judicial system. It's not just one thing, because they've proven that on the downtown east side where they do erect stuff like you're talking about, Tom, with modular housing and these container condos basically that they're putting in, and unfortunately a lot of people don't want to live in those because they have other problems that they're dealing with other than like finding an affordable rental may not actually be that person's problem, right? Finding the affordable rental is probably more a problem for the person that maybe I got to start sleeping on my friend's couch and seeing if I can bum a room off of them, as opposed to the guy struggling with opioids on the downtown east side. So it's not just one thing. And that is a downfall of us, because we view the real estate world from the point of people who own real estate and the people who want to acquire real estate. And those people are set up usually so much better in the first place. Insert argument for whether or not you think it's their fault or not, so that's fine. But that's where our argument comes in about, is it a good to rent or not? Now, personally, my argument for why it's terrible to rent and why you should own your home is because when you're 65 years old, if you can have zero cost of living for shelter and a paid off mortgage, you're going to do better than 95% of people out there. That's my only argument for it. Whether or not it's, put it in the S&P and rent and all this cost of maintenance and all that stuff, fine. I'm a simple person. The simplicity of it all is, if I can buy something at 30 years old and by retirement 60, 65, have it paid off, I'm probably in a better situation. But you're right. It is so much that is not done due to the data and the industry and the professionals that are trying to tell the government, hey, maybe this will work. The part I don't like about it is the government side of it. And maybe this is a really good segue, because I know the BCREA and other associations have all sorts of good metrics and all sorts of lobbying that they do to try and improve things. And then you guys, in particular, do lobby the government to try and get stuff done. And then maybe it feels like it's probably most of the time falls on deaf ears and they do whatever's going to get them the votes or whatever plays well. Right? That's the experience. So you've seen, I would assume, more changes in BC real estate than we could ever have imagined. Like since 2018, when we lost council and when the NDP came in 2017, the changes are unreal. And I'm not just talking from the point of view of like all of the rules that have been put out there in regards to, density and all this sort of stuff, but also just the regulation upon the industry. It's nuts. I'm getting somewhere, Trevor. Hang with me. I talk long too.
Oh, I know exactly where you're getting.
I want to know, like, from your point of view, I'm not going to ask you what you think of regulators and lobbying the government, because I can only imagine. But like, with all of this change out there, do you view any one or two of these things of actually having a positive effect? Can you maybe point to one you think has had a positive effect? Or is this just more opportunities for governments to try and win over a popular vote?
So again, I think there's a lot there, Steve, and a few things about it.
A lot.
One is that since 2018, in the bubble of organized real estate, the impact on realtors, 26,000 realtors, and the bubble of British Columbia, and the bubble of the regulatory environment, there's been a lot of change. There's no question, as you pointed out. But if you look at the regulatory environment surrounding healthcare or the legal profession or notaries or insert profession here since 2018, there's been a profound change in all of them. You talk to any nurse or doctor, and the amount of paperwork that they have to do after a visit now compared to pre-COVID is profoundly different. Governments around the world, maybe with the exception of our neighbors to the south, only recently, but even that's arguable, have and will continue to put a lot of pressure on the regulatory environment, on protecting what they deem to be protecting the consumer. Right? It just, with the pace of technology changes, with the pace of, the amount of challenges that there are for the average consumer out there and potential risks, the government feels that their role is to go out and protect. And quite frankly, that is the mandate of every regulator, is to protect the consumer. One of your comments just now was about you said I won't ask you about lobbying the regulator because I can only imagine, but my perspective is different than most, I think. And we're very fortunate in British Columbia to have a good working relationship with our regulator. And there's a lot of people that will tell me, that's not a good thing. That you should be always at odds with the regulator. Our job is to hold them to account. A lot of realtors think that. But if we, by virtue of them being a regulator and us thinking we should be at odds with them, always talk against everything that they're doing, it implies that we're not about the consumer protection. We're not about protecting the public. And I think that there's an opportunity, and this is how I operate. I've been in front of audiences of realtors and said, if you want, every time the regulator does something, if you want us looking for the closest torch and pitchfork, then you hired the wrong guy. Because I'm very much, let's work together so that they can do their job and we can do ours, so that realtors can continue to represent clients, can continue to have a role, and can continue to be successful even in the environment of a changing world and changing expectations and consumer protection and all of the things that come with it. I've got an article coming out in REM magazine this month, and I make the argument of the evolving value proposition of realtors. And I think one of the things, I've written an article previously in REM called Realtors and Regulation. I think that there's not enough emphasis and value as part of the value proposition of realtors put on the fact that they are regulated, put it on the fact that there are requirements and obligations that we can walk up to a client and say, look, I'm regulated. AI, data-driven online platforms, FSBOs, whatever it is, aren't. But I am regulated, and you can have some confidence in that. And as a result of that, I understand how FINTRAC works, and I can explain that to you. I understand a cooling off period, a homebuyer rescission period in British Columbia, and I can explain that to you. And all of these things, homebuyer rescission period doesn't just apply to realtors and the transactions that they're doing or licensees. They apply to every single residential real estate transaction in British Columbia. So if a mom and pop, an aunt is selling to her nephew, they're obligated to comply with homebuyer rescission period. That gives the realtors an opportunity to say, let me help you with that. I'm regulated. I have this behind me, and you're protected as a result. And I think there's not, and I'm not getting out of the fact that our job, we just sent we've had conversations. I was on the phone with the CEO of BCFSA at 8:00 2 nights ago. We're always in contact around some of the things that they're doing. And we want to make sure that these changes are coming. We can't sit. You look at the environments where a provincial regulator is at odds with a provincial association, and everything is a fight, and that association is always just, every time the regulator does something, they're fighting it. They're no further ahead. It's not like the regulator in those provinces are going, oh yeah, okay, wait, let's not do anything, let's not make any changes because we might, the association might come at us. The changes are coming anyway. So where we have the opportunity to influence those changes, we've got a seat at the table as those conversations are happening. We have people, on our staff, myself included, we have 5 former managing brokers on our staff. So we see the industry impact. We can have those conversations, and it really makes a big difference. So,
but that's with the regulator, right? And I don't fault the regulator at any point in view. What I do fault is the regulator's mandate is handed to them by the government, and the government is, in my opinion, only doing things in order to garner more votes and not doing anything in the name of fairness or protection.
Right.
For instance, the buyer rescission period. If you're going to have a buyer rescission period, the government needs to understand that they are favoring one citizen over another citizen. So as a result, you should have a seller rescission period, of which they do not bring in, right? Because then the seller could pick a better offer if it comes in 2 or 3 days. So this is the type of thing that is the biggest frustration I find, because now we are, by far, I think, British Columbia is the most regulated real estate market in the entire world by a mile. And then and I don't think it's fixed anything, because this is aside from like prices and market. That's going to do what it's going to do. But I don't feel like necessarily the industry, as the actual individual realtors themselves, are keeping up any better. There's just more that they don't understand, rather than trying to focus on having them be good, professional, educated agents.
Yeah, and I mean, so there's a couple of things there. The fact that decisions in a government are politically motivated shouldn't be that's not
news.
And I think some of these things like the same happens. Like we've got an NDP government in British Columbia. And I talk to realtors, and we've got 26,000. They all, like, everybody votes differently. Everybody's in different personal, situations around what their political leanings are and that kind of thing. But there's definitely, a sense or an expectation that the general populace of realtors is right leaning, is business friendly. So then they'll again, when I'm standing in front of a room of realtors and they're bringing up all of these points that you're bringing up, it's like, how can the government think that this is a good thing, or how can the government politicize this piece, or why would this government want to do this? And it's like, an NDP government is going to act like an NDP government, and the decisions that are being made are always going to be political. I just finished reading Jody Wilson-Raybould's book, Indian in the Cabinet, and I mean, folks that have read it, depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, you're definitely going to have different opinions. But anytime, I also read a book by George Abbott, former MLA, cabinet minister under Gordon Campbell's government in British Columbia, big business, small government, or small government, big business. And like their analyses as much of the government as they are of anything else. And they talk to exactly what happens when somebody comes in under the mandate, the personal mandate of going in and making change. And then 2 years into government, everything shifts and it becomes about votes. It becomes about making decisions for a re-election, right? And that is exactly how politics works. And so our job is to be the voice of realtors. We don't go out as soon as the government announces something. We don't go out and say, okay, here's our opinion, or this is what we think should happen. We go out and we talk to a whole bunch of realtors. We look at the pros and cons. We look at other jurisdictions to see what the impacts are. And in the case of home buyer rescission period, we looked at Australia and we looked at other places, I think in Europe. And we develop a position not based on what one realtor thinks we should do, but based on all of the metrics that are logical for the entire environment. We pushed back hard on home buyer rescission period. We had a white paper called A Better Way Home, and we had a lot of news time around it. It was coming in just as I came into this role, and I spent the entire summer of 2022 on media interviews and pushing back on government. That was one minister who, quite frankly, had it out for realtors. Standing at a microphone and making a decision and pushing an agenda that was actually negatively impactful for the consumer and for the realtor, obviously. At the end of the day, as much as we push back, the decision was made. And so then we shift our focus to say, okay, if that's coming in, how do we support? What's the best we can do? How do we make this more palatable for everybody, and change our lobbying efforts to internal to say, okay, let's leverage this a little bit if we can. We're still pushing back on home buyer rescission period. There's still there's no metrics to say that it's being used to the extent that it's intended, though it's intended for hot markets. But I hear what you're saying, Steve. The changes have been profound. We've been quite frankly, there'd be more if we weren't here, and that's always hard for people to appreciate when they haven't seen all of the work that happens behind the scenes and the conversations that we have. And I get that because I was in those positions as a broker and stuff too. But we do a lot of work to be the voice and mitigate the amount and the intensity of the changes that happen.
Well, here's a little bit of feedback for you, and I mean, we're deep enough here where we can go as inside baseball as they want. The amount of extra disclosures, paperwork, all the extra stuff we have to do now.
Yeah.
I was talking to a guy in the office who's kind of one of those old time guys, never had an assistant, just working on his own. He says, I can't do the same amount of transactions as I did before in my entire life because now he's the compliance to the T guy, like 100% of compliance is perfect. And he's struggling. And to be honest, I don't know if I should even bring this up here, but I'll say it. My structure right now, due to the amount of compliance that I have, I believe I have to increase my fees. And I don't think that's something that will get much attention at all. So the amount of protection we have is actually harming, in my opinion, at least harming the pocketbooks of the buyers and the sellers, because fees need to go up.
Buying insurance is boring and frustrating, but squareone.ca makes it easy. For your landlord, tenant, or homeowner insurance policy, go to squareone.ca/The Tom Storey Show to get your free quote in just minutes. Use our link, squareone.ca/The Tom Storey Show right now, and you'll save $20.
Right? I'm seeing my competition's fees getting higher too. And I don't know how to see that because I don't see their listing contracts, obviously. But I think that the regulator doesn't realize that when you add all of this stuff on top, it does create issue, right? Like it does create other things. I guess I'm just trying to say it creates other issues.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a couple of pieces there. I mean, the disclosures are meant for transparency, and I think the industry, the consumers are definitely driving the transparency conversation. We're seeing that, and that's not Jeff King, the CEO of the Greater Vancouver Realtors, and I co-wrote an article in REM a little while ago called "The Consumer is Undefeated." The consumer will continue to dictate exactly how the MLS systems work, what information is available. They'll go to the most information that they can get when they're shopping or when they're looking around. And if other platforms are coming in and being more transparent, then it's going to negatively impact organized real estate. And that's the expectation around for the regulator too, is be more transparent, disclose. And what they're doing is, in order to motivate that, every time something happens, we're having conversations again now about more disclosure forms. And so, but I will say, the new CEO, Tolga Yalkin, the new CEO of the BC Financial Services Authority, comes from OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions out of Toronto, Ottawa, federal regulator. And he's definitely we're hearing more talk around kind of right size regulation, around amalgamating some of these requirements, so that it's not only what happens is, and he said it on a podcast just recently with the Greater Vancouver Realtors, is with all of these disclosures, it becomes disclosure fatigue. So the intent is transparency, but then you have the question of what is actually being disclosed. How much is the consumer paying attention, and how much is the licensee actually talking about it, right? So that's the first piece. Is I think we're going to start seeing some changes in attitude around not just more is better, but having a different conversation about how this is the delivery and the transparency and the openness. The other piece around this, and this is the piece that BCREA is working on, we're just doing some exploratory work, and this is really huge as an endeavor for the industry as a whole, is looking at the future of the transaction model in general. And we're still working in anybody if you keep referring to your hardcore listeners that are still listening now, if they are realtors, then they know that most of the transaction, or if anybody's bought or sold a home recently, most of the transaction happens in a PDF environment. You draft the contract, it goes into a signing platform, Authentisign or DocuSign or something, goes off to your client. And all of that is working within a PDF environment, in a forms environment. And I think as long as we're using the word forms to describe any of this environment, we're going to constantly be back to 8.5 by 11, 3 copies, press hard. We're only moving from the paper-based into online. We've moved the paper online. That's all we've done.
Yeah.
Where there is a future where it is digitized, where the entire transaction is happening in an ecosystem where the realtor, the buyer, the seller, the other realtor, everybody's seeing it in real time. The example that I use is when I go to Expedia and I put all my data in to go on a trip, it doesn't then send me a PDF that I sign and send back to them so that they can put the data into. The data's there. It's a data capture environment, and our transaction environment is not being data captured. We do a good job on the property environment around MLS, but all of the transaction data is being lost into the ether with PDFs. So imagine an environment where when a client is in this ecosystem, it's explaining in real time what these disclosures are and why they need to sign them. Everything's happening in more of a virtual environment. The data that's going in there can start to, I'm big on data actually informing some of this stuff. So in real time, we can see where there's challenges with regulation, where rules are overstepping, where disclosures aren't being understood. And we can get that if we're starting to see have more of a line of sight into the transactional world. And so that's kind of an environment that we're working in. And I think that'll start to take away some of this compliance burden on brokers. We talked about managing brokers earlier. Like the realtors is one thing. Imagine the managing brokers that are responsible for every transaction that flows through their brokerage. If all of a sudden compliance is, we just know compliance happens because the platform doesn't allow missteps, right? If everybody's working within a digitized environment, you can't not disclose. The platform says you have to disclose this before you do this, and I'm not letting you move on. Right. And so all of that, and then all of a sudden the brokers are going, okay, I don't have to read every contract because I know everything's being done. And that's a future state. Like I'm talking years, not months. But that is the future environment, and that's where we will get to.
I would love to see something like that, because you're right, like disclosure fatigue. I've never heard it put that way, but that is a thing. Yeah. All of the forms that have been introduced
for both parties.
It is, because all of the forms that I've seen introduced since the removal or the prohibition of limited dual agency in BC, I have never had a seller or buyer want to see the form, care to see the form. They were like, get this out of the way so I can see the contract of purchase and sale. Yep. And that's not good either, because now they've got their initial on a piece of paper that they don't care about and don't understand, but it just protects the realtor's butt when the regulator comes, because it's like, well, I've got your initial on it, right? So I do think that, like, for instance, if we have 35 standardized disclosures in BC, which we're pretty bloody well close to, the fact that it's not one standardized form is insane to me, right? But, what do you do? What do you do? We are getting close to the end. I think we're going to have to save our managing broker talk for next time we have you on.
if there's a next time.
No, there will be. I've been quiet for a little while, but even here in Ontario, like TRESA that just came in, I think has actually been really good and very clear on everything. But before I can start a conversation with any client, I'm like, hey, I'm going to send you, and then we're going to review a 12-page document. And they're like, why? I just want to buy a house. I'm like, I'm sending it to you, and we're going to review it. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with
Trevor,
that.
I'm sure you know that. Like what we call our DORT here, our disclosure of representation trading services, is 2 pages. In Ontario, it's like 12. Yeah.
But that's where a lot of this stuff is shifting. Like it's what's happened is that, and this happens with any type of a legacy institution or organization, is you're building on top of a foundation over and over and over. So the existing act only gives so much opportunity for, the regulator or legally the legislation to change things only so much. And that all takes, that's like, I was there in Saskatchewan with the regulator when we were trying to get legislation changed, and it's like pushing a rope uphill. So what happens is, as you pointed out, Tom, the Trust and Real Estate Act, TRESA, as you said, I really try to, for everybody's sake, move away from acronyms, but Trust and Real Estate Act, which is the act in Ontario that governs licensees or registrants in Ontario, that was a sweeping change. Right? That was starting fresh. And sometimes you need that in order to start to do the things that Steve is talking about, where it's this amalgamation, this getting rid of confusion, this all the little layers that were built on a foundation over the years kind of revamping. And the mortgage brokers are going through that in BC. They're regulated by our same regulator. They're getting a new act right away. And so like those are opportunities or not, I mean, change is always hard. That didn't happen easily when TRESA was put in Ontario. It was a challenge for a lot of people. But those, you're building on legacy foundations, and you're trying to bring, in Ontario's case, 96,000 people along with you as those changes happen. That's not easy. And we're always trying to figure out how best.
Oh no,
to
they're always happy with everything. We're always happy.
Every change, they're adaptable. I actually say in this article that I have coming out, like that is something. We are a pretty resilient industry. Like every time I write an article that challenges, it says things are going to change. There's inevitably comments that say, yeah, people have been saying that for 40 years and we're still here. And it's not that we're not still here. It's that people have constantly identified there's changes coming, so let's be adaptable, and we do adapt.
I also believe for real estate agents, if you spend most of your day complaining about new regulations that you don't like remember what your job is to be a great resource to your clients. Instead of complaining on Facebook today, call your past clients, see how they're doing. That probably moves your business a lot more forward than just complaining about a new regulation you don't like. You're going to have to adapt or get out of the industry. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but that's where we're at right now.
But you understand, Tom, for anybody that's being held to a high standard, and then the complaints coming from the public about the agents maybe would be, that they didn't hold themselves up to this high standard, right? And then the part that drives me nuts is, well, that means we just need even more rules and even higher standards to hold the people to that maybe weren't already complying. So the education piece and the higher standard of the agent is very, very important, but just more paperwork all the time, I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't matter how you go about it. The people that are going to resist are going to resist, right? And there's the regulator's role, and then there's our role as an industry. And so this is a conversation that we're having industry wide. Is this conversation around professionalism? Is what is professionalism to the average realtor? What is the perception of professionalism by the consumer? Realtors, historically and famously don't have a wide approval rating when we do public polling. But everybody does love their realtor. Those polling numbers go sky high when you talk about somebody and their own realtor rather than the perception of realtors in general. And so the conversation that we're having around increasing professionalism starts to talk about what are the entry requirements coming into the industry to get a license? What are the requirements for maintaining? What are the requirements to be held to a higher account? And this is going to I mean, I've said a bunch of things that people aren't going to agree with, as I said it on this podcast, but this is going to be another one, that when you talk about more education for realtors or other higher requirements of any kind, or penalties / discipline to compliance requirements, those kinds of things. Every realtor that you talk to thinks that that's important, that we can use all of that, but for everybody else, not me. I'm a good realtor. I've got it figured out, but everybody else that I deal with doesn't. Right. And then that just that type of perspective changes the perspective of the industry for the client that you're sitting across from at the kitchen table that you're talking like that. So it's a bigger narrative, it's a bigger conversation, but there are some tangibles that we can start to do. And those are the conversations that we're having with what are the specifics that we can do to change the perception and increase professionalism amongst realtors?
Well, I will say that as my final thought, you're not the first person to bring up the fact that apparently the CEO of the BCFSA? Yeah. I've heard from many people around the office. I'm involved at the Fraser Valley Board, and my office has always been deeply. It is well noted that there is a fresh, new approach with really good ideas now coming out of there, as opposed to maybe previously. So I don't know the person, whoever the new CEO is.
Tolga Yelkin. Yeah.
So I have no idea. I've just heard the name now, and I've heard oh, this is going to be better for the industry. So I'm hoping that's the case. Maybe we'll have a chance to reach out to
get them on.
Yeah, love to.
It all takes it all takes time, right? And that's the other piece of it, is that, any time we talk about change, everybody's resistant. But a line that's become famous in BC for anybody that's heard me talk, and but I actually heard it from somebody else, is realtors hate two things: change and the way things are. and that's inevitable. It doesn't matter what you do, you're going to get there's 170,000 of you across Canada. You're going to, every time leadership makes a decision, it's going to be a challenge.
I'm definitely a realtor then, Tom.
like everything you're trying to change in your life, slow motion is better than no motion. Yeah. So get up, do your thing. Final question, then we will wrap. Everybody through the selling New York shows and Beverly Hills and crazy prices going up got their real estate license. Is it fair to say, because I've seen this on the Toronto Real Estate Board, that for the first time in a long time, your membership may actually be slightly decreasing, or is it kind of held surprisingly just based on the transaction volume coming down?
Yeah. So when you look at the numbers historically over the last 20, 25 years, we see dips based on market activity of new entrants coming into the industry. So we, and it's always a little bit of a lag. So if there's a peak in the market, all of a sudden there's more realtors coming in. If there's a dip a little bit later, there's fewer realtors coming in. What we don't tend to see is max exodus. Once people have gone through, whether they're new or retiring later on in their career, once they've got their license, they've done all the work, they've done all the education for the cost and the effort to maintain it. Even if they're doing the odd deal or not doing deals, they typically hang on to it. If they're new to the industry, they'll hang on to it until they think that the market's come back enough that they can get. All of that said, this is the first time in probably that whole history that we have started to see more people leaving than coming in. So over that 25-year period, we've seen a steady, though not pronounced, increase of over the 25 years. And this is the first time where we will see that dip. It'll be very, very slight. Our budget numbers have been reforecast, and it's not impactful, but it is the first time. So watching that trend, we talked about the aging environment around managing brokers and that role. We've got 1,400 of them in the province of British Columbia. Those are metrics that we're starting to watch, and not just because, certainly not for our organization. I've always said, if there were half the number of realtors and we charge them twice as much, which when we charge them twice as much is $34, not $17 a month. It's not that much money that BCREA is getting. I think the half number of realtors would gladly pay that to still have the advocacy, to still have the support and all the things that we're doing. So, it's not about protectionism of our organization from our perspective. It's about, what are the expectations for these roles? What are the expectations for the people doing the work? And how do we make sure that the consumer is still served and the realtor still brings that value proposition to the table? And so that's an evolving question. And I think in the short term, we'll start to see a little bit change in those numbers than we have historically, but I don't think it's going to be super profound.
Because the transaction volume is down much more significantly than the real estate agent population leaving the industry, right? So that, we'll get into this at another time, but teams are a massive thing in Toronto. And I've had more people try to join my team this year than I've ever seen before, because it's a tougher market.
I keep saying, I'm just going to, just before you wrap up, I keep talking about these articles I've written, but I do that on purpose because I am vocal. I've been called as much a critic of the industry as I am a champion. I'm a huge champion of this industry. I love it. But I've also written 2 articles, one about the future role of the managing broker and the impact that that's going to have, and another one around teams and the impact that has had on the role of the managing broker and kind of that regulatory environment. So all of those are in REM magazine somewhere or other.
I'm gonna read the teams one. I'd be interested to see what you said about that.
Talk about a regulation you could bring in that would actually make sense. How about a team leader license? You can't just say you're a team leader. How about a team leader license? And I think I think so. The BCFSA is doing a consultation in the fall, and they're doing one right now. I think it's coming out today, a discussion paper, and then they're doing another discussion paper in the fall
And I think the one in the fall is going to be more around what they're calling brokerage governance. And I really like that wording. It's less about the role and the regulation around the role, and more about what should the expectations around brokerage governance be, and then allow the industry and the business to fulfill those duties. So,
Trevor, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone that wants to check out the articles you've written that you've talked about, REM, it's just rem.ca.com?
I think they've changed it a couple of times.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was REM Online, remonline.com, but I think they changed it back to realestatemagazine.com. I'm not sure.
Got it. Another acronym that we'll explain to people as we
Yeah.
haven't done enough. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and we will see you all next week. Bye.
Thanks.